Some say broken things can't be fixed, but Jack Morrison has made a living proving otherwise. As a small-town mechanic and single dad, he's built his reputation on breathing life back into machines others have given up on. When he gets called to repair a tractor at a remote Nebraska farm, it seems like just another job until he realizes the owner is Sarah Williams, the girl who broke his heart 15 years ago. What he doesn't know is that while he's been keeping his daughter's world turning one repair at a time, Sarah has transformed her family farm into a billion-dollar agricultural empire. As their paths cross again, they'll discover that some connections, like some machines, never truly break. They just need the right person to fix them. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dawn crept through the workshop windows, painting stripes of golden light across Jack Morrison's weathered workbench. The familiar scent of coffee and motor oil filled the air as he stood at his small kitchenette, simultaneously flipping pancakes and reviewing the day's work orders. His daughter Amy's favorite mechanical pencil lay next to his worn leather journal, where she'd been practicing her multiplication tables the night before while he finished a last-minute carburetor repair. "Dad, have you seen my blue science e-folder?" Amy's voice echoed down the stairs that connected their small apartment to the workshop below. At 12, she was already showing signs of inheriting his methodical nature, though this morning's scramble suggested otherwise. "Check the kitchen table, sweetheart, right next to your lunch bag." Jack smiled, sliding the last pancake onto a plate shaped like a gear, a birthday gift Amy had given him last year. His eyes caught the edge of a past-due notice peeking out from beneath his invoice book, and his smile faltered slightly. The school trip to the Science Museum in Omaha wasn't going to pay for itself, but he'd figure something out. He always did. Amy bounded down the stairs, her dark hair swinging in a ponytail, blue folder already in hand. "Found it! You were right." As usual, she paused, taking in the sight of breakfast. "Dad, you didn't have to make pancakes. I know you got in late last night." "Can't have my chief assistant running on empty, can I?" Jack ruffled her hair as she sat down, earning a playful groan. "Besides, we've got that big job out at the Williams farm today. Could use the extra energy." Amy's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "The Williams farm? You mean the one with all those fancy automated systems you were reading about?" Jack nodded, taking a sip of coffee to hide his own curiosity about the job. Williams Sustainable Farms had been making headlines lately with their innovative farming techniques. It was unusual for such a high-tech operation to call in a small-town mechanic like him. Apparently, they've got an old tractor that needs some attention. Sometimes the old ways are still the best ways. "Is that why you won't let Mr. Chen upgrade your diagnostic computer?" Amy grinned, knowing she'd caught him in his own logic. "That's different," Jack protested, though his eyes crinkled with amusement. "My system works just fine." Speaking of which, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded $10 bill. "For lunch this week. And Amy?" He waited until she looked up. "I'm working on the science trip money. Promise." Her face softened with understanding far beyond her years. "I know, Dad. Don't worry about it too much, okay? Jenny said I could borrow her spare sleeping bag for the overnight stay." Jack's throat tightened as he watched her gather her things, handling the $10 with careful reverence before tucking it into her wallet. She'd grown up too fast, learned too early about budget constraints and making do. Sometimes he wondered if he'd done right by her, raising her in the apartment above his workshop, but the alternative, selling the business his father had built, had never really been an option. "Got your homework, permission slip, emergency contact numbers?" He ran through their morning checklist as she shouldered her backpack. "All set, and I remembered to pack my inhaler this time." She gave him a quick hug, smelling of strawberry, shampoo, and maple syrup. "Good luck with the fancy farm, Dad. Maybe they'll have more jobs for you if you fix their tractor." "Maybe." Jack agreed, watching her head out to where the school bus would soon arrive. Once she was gone, he allowed himself a moment to slump against the workbench, the weight of bills and responsibilities settling back onto his shoulders. The stack of invoices needed attention, but the Williams job was paying premium rates for same-day service. If he played his cards right, it could lead to regular maintenance work. He pulled his tool chest out from under the bench, methodically checking each compartment. The familiar ritual steadied him, each wrench and socket in its proper place, ready for whatever challenges the day might bring. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "The right tool for the right job, Jackie. That's half the battle, right?" There, the morning sun climbed higher as Jack loaded his truck, its rusted blue paint a stark contrast to the precision tools within. He'd been meaning to repaint it for years, but there was always something more urgent needing attention. As he did a final check of his supplies, his eyes fell on the past due notice he'd tucked into his journal. Amy never complained, but he knew how much that science trip meant to her. Maybe this Williams job would be the break they needed. The workshop phone rang just as he was locking up, and he checked his watch with a frown. The school bus had already come and gone, so it wouldn't be Amy. "Morrison Repairs," he answered, wedging the phone between his ear and shoulder as he sorted through his key ring. "Mr. Morrison, this is Thomas from Williams Farms again. Just wanted to confirm you're still coming out this morning. Ms. Williams specifically requested." "On my way now," Jack interrupted, not wanting to seem too eager, but also not wanting to risk losing the job. "Should be there in about 40 minutes, traffic permitting." As he hung up, something about the call nagged at him. The farm manager had mentioned Ms. Williams with a peculiar emphasis, but Jack brushed the thought aside. Right now, all that mattered was getting there on time and doing the job right. Everything else would sort itself out. The GPS led Jack down a winding road that seemed to stretch endlessly through fields of emerging winter wheat. He'd grown up in this county, knew most of its back roads and family farms by heart, but this place felt different. The traditional wooden fences had been replaced with sleek, solar-powered gates, and surveillance cameras perched discreetly among the old cottonwoods. When the farm finally came into view, Jack had to resist the urge to whistle. The main complex sprawled across the landscape like something out of a science fiction movie. Solar panels glinted atop modern steel buildings, and autonomous farming equipment moved with precision through the fields. This wasn't just a farm, it was agricultural innovation incarnate. "Mr. Morrison?" A man in pressed khakis and a polo shirt approached as Jack parked his truck. "I'm Thomas Chen, the farm manager. Thank you for coming on such short notice." His handshake was firm but brief, his attention already turning to a tablet in his hand. "The tractor's this way." Jack followed Thomas past a row of state-of-the-art combines, each probably worth more than his entire business. Workers in Williams Farms uniforms moved purposefully between buildings, some carrying tablets like Thomas, others operating drones that hovered over distant fields. "Quite an operation you've got here," Jack commented, trying to keep his tone neutral. Thomas's expression softened slightly. "Ms. Williams believes in blending tradition with innovation." Speaking of tradition, he gestured toward an old equipment barn set apart from the modern buildings. "That's where you'll find your patient." The barn door rolled open with a familiar creak, and Jack's heart skipped a beat. Sitting in a shaft of dusty sunlight was a 1960s John Deere 4020, its green paint faded but intact. Unlike the gleaming machines outside, this tractor wore its age proudly. Jack ran his hand along its hood, feeling the history in its metal. "Ms. Williams insists on keeping it," Thomas explained, sounding slightly apologetic. "She uses it personally for the heritage wheat field on the north side of the property. Says it maintains the proper soil compression or something." He shrugged. "Anyway, it won't start. We've had our regular maintenance team look at it, but they're more comfortable with the computerized systems." Jack was already opening his tool chest, his mind cataloging possibilities. "How long has it been sitting?" "About 2 weeks. Miss Williams was quite upset when it broke down. She's been asking about it daily, though she's in meetings in Omaha. Today, Thomas checked his tablet again. I should warn you, if you can't fix it, we'll understand. We can always order a new... I can fix it, Jack interrupted, perhaps too quickly, but he knew this model had practically grown up in its shadow. His father had maintained dozens of them over the years. Opening the engine compartment felt like greeting an old friend. Thomas raised an eyebrow but nodded. I'll leave you to it then. Call if you need anything. He headed toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Mr. Morrison, Ms. Williams left strict instructions that no one is to replace any original parts without her approval. She's particular about this machine. Alone in the barn, Jack began his inspection. The familiar smell of old grease and diesel fuel was oddly comforting after the antiseptic cleanliness of the main complex. He pulled out his journal, making initial notes when something caught his eye. There, carved into the worn leather of the seat, were initials he hadn't seen in 15 years, SW plus JM. His pencil stopped mid-word. Memories flooded back. Summer evenings spent in his father's workshop, a girl with wheat gold hair learning to change spark plugs, dreams shared over engine parts and sweet tea. But it couldn't be. Sarah Williams had left for business school. Out east, had bigger dreams than their small town could hold. The sound of approaching footsteps snapped him back to the present. He quickly returned to his inspection, trying to ignore the way his hands had started to shake. It was probably just a coincidence. After all, those weren't exactly uncommon initials. But as he worked, each familiar curve and component of the old tractor seemed to whisper of the past, of summers long gone, and promises that had faded like the green paint beneath his hands. The distributor cap was just as Jack suspected, fouled but fixable. He was deep in concentration, his sleeves rolled up and hands black with grease, when he heard the barn door open. The click of boots on concrete echoed through the space, but he didn't look up, focused on not stripping the delicate thread of the spark plug he was cleaning. Thomas said you were making progress. The voice was familiar yet different, stronger, more assured, but with the same gentle lilt he remembered from physics class discussions and late-night phone calls. Jack's hands stilled. Slowly he straightened up from the engine compartment, his heart hammering against his ribs. Sarah Williams stood in a shaft of sunlight, dressed in dark jeans and a crisp white shirt, her blonde hair shorter now, but still catching the light like wheat in autumn. She looked both exactly the same and completely different. The distributor. Cap was giving you trouble, he said automatically, falling back on the safety of mechanics. Should be an easy fix. He wiped his hands on a shop rag, buying time as his mind raced to reconcile the Sarah he remembered with the woman before him. She took a step closer, her eyes moving from his face to the tools laid out with precision on his work cloth. Still, keeping everything organized, I see. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. Some things don't change. Some things do, he replied, more sharply than he'd intended. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with 15 years of unspoken history. Sarah's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly. I didn't know you were still in the area. When Thomas mentioned Morrison repairs, I thought... She trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. That it was my dad, Jack supplied. He passed away 5 years ago. I took over the business. He turned back to the tractor, needing something solid to focus on. Never thought I'd see this old girl again. You kept her running all this time. Tried to. Sarah moved closer, running. Her hand along the tractor's faded hood. Your dad taught me enough basics to keep her going, but lately... She shook her head. The new maintenance team doesn't understand why I won't just replace her with something modern. Jack found himself nodding. They suggested the same thing to me, but these old machines, they're built to last. Just need someone who knows how to listen to them. He caught himself falling into their old rhythm of conversation and straightened. Up again. Should have her running in about an hour. I remember when you first showed me how to check the timing. Sarah's voice was softer now, tinged with memory. Right here in this barn, Back when it was just my family's farm, not—" She gestured vaguely at the complex outside. Jack's eyes fell on a framed photograph hanging on the barn wall, one he hadn't noticed before. It showed the farm as it had been, the old Williams homestead, Sarah's parents standing proud in front of their first successful wheat harvest. Sarah herself was there too, younger, her arm linked through her father's, their matching grins full of hope and determination. "Your parents would be proud," he said quietly, meaning it. "What you've built here, it's impressive." Something flickered in Sarah's eyes. Gratitude, perhaps, or grief. "Dad always said the land had more to teach us. I just found new ways to listen." She paused, studying him. "And you? Thomas mentioned you're raising a daughter alone?" The mention of Amy shifted something in Jack's chest. "Yeah, Amy. She's 12, smart as a whip, especially when it comes to machines." Pride crept into his voice, despite his attempt to keep things professional. "Like father, like daughter," Sarah said softly. Then, as if catching herself, she straightened and adopted a more business-like tone. "I should let you get back to work, but would you like to stay for lunch? The cafeteria here makes a mean chicken pot pie on Thursdays." Jack's hands stilled on the wrench he'd been fidgeting with. Lunch meant conversation. Conversation meant questions neither of them might be ready to answer. But before he could form a response, his stomach growled traitorously, reminding him he'd given his breakfast pancakes to Amy. "Lunch would be good," he found himself saying. "Just let me finish up here first." Sarah nodded, already turning toward the door. "I'll send Thomas to show you the way when you're done." She paused at the threshold, looking back over her shoulder. "It's good to see you, Jack, really." As the door closed behind her, Jack sank onto the tractor's seat, his fingers finding the carved initials without looking. The past had a way of catching up, it seemed, even after 15 years of running from it. The Williams Farms cafeteria was nothing like the small diner where Jack usually grabbed lunch. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked experimental crop fields, and employees in smart casual wear sat at sleek tables, many working on laptops between bites. Jack felt increasingly conscious of his work clothes and grease-stained hands as Thomas led him through the space. Sarah waited at a corner table, her attention focused on a framed document hanging on the wall beside her. As Jack approached, he realized it was her first business plan, handwritten on graph paper, complete with teenage doodles in the margins. The sight of it, preserved like a museum piece, made his chest tight with memories of late nights spent, watching her sketch out her dreams. "I kept it to remind me where I started," Sarah said, noticing his gaze. "Please sit. I took the liberty of ordering for both of us, unless your taste in comfort food has changed dramatically." Right on cue, a server appeared with 2 chicken pot pies, steam rising from their golden crusts. Jack's stomach rumbled appreciatively. "Still a mind reader, I see. Just a good memory." Sarah smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Though, I admit I'm curious about what else I've missed. A daughter. I never pictured you as a single dad." Jack cut into his pot pie, buying time to formulate his response. "Neither did I. Her mother left when Amy was 3. Decided small-town life wasn't for her." He kept his tone neutral, well-practiced from years of answering Amy's questions about her mother. "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. "That must have been difficult." "We managed. Amy's amazing. Adapts to everything life throws at her. Speaking of which," he checked his watch, "I should wrap this up soon. Need to pick her up from school at 3. Sarah nodded, but her expression had grown distant. "You know, I almost called the shop a few times over the years, when Dad passed, and then Mom—" She traced the rim of her water glass. "But I wasn't sure if you'd want to hear from me after." How things ended. The old pain surfaced, dulled by time but not forgotten. You made your choice, had your dreams to chase, and you had your roots to protect. Sarah's voice held no accusation, just stated fact. "Dad always said we were both too stubborn for our own good. But look at us now. You've kept the Morrison legacy alive, and I've built something my parents never could have imagined." Jack glanced at the business plan on the wall again. "Is it everything you hoped for?" "Most days." Sarah's answer came too quickly, too practiced. She caught herself and added more quietly, "The work is everything I dreamed of. The rest, let's just say success doesn't always fill the spaces you expect it to." A comfortable silence fell as they ate, broken only by the distant hum of conversation from other tables. Jack found himself studying Sarah when she wasn't looking. The confident set of her shoulders, the tiny worry lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, the way she still tucked her hair behind her ear when deep in thought. "Your father would be proud of you too, you know," Sarah said suddenly. "Keeping the business going, raising Amy on your own, that takes its own kind of courage. Different kind of courage than turning a family farm into—" Jack gestured at their surroundings. "Different roads, same determination." Sarah smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. "Maybe that's why I kept the old tractor, reminder of where both roads started." Jack's phone buzzed, his afternoon alarm. "I should head out. Need to finish up the tractor and get to Amy's school." He stood, then hesitated. "The tractor will need regular maintenance to keep running properly. Old engines like that, they do better with consistent care." "Is that your professional opinion?" Sarah's tone was light, but her eyes were intent. "It is. Could set up a monthly schedule if you're interested. I think that would be wise." Sarah stood as well. "For the tractor's sake, of course." "Of course." Jack managed a small smile. "I'll have Thomas email you the maintenance contract." As he walked back to the barn, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just agreed to something much more complicated than routine tractor maintenance. Behind him, through the cafeteria windows, Sarah stood looking at her old business plan, her expression unreadable. Jack made it to the school parking lot with 5 minutes to spare, his mind still spinning from the day's events. He watched the stream of kids flowing out of the building, searching for Amy's familiar blue backpack. When she emerged, she was clutching a paper to her chest, practically bouncing with excitement. "Dad, Dad, look what I got on my family history project." She yanked open the truck door and thrust the paper at him. A bright red A+ decorated the top corner of what appeared to be a family tree assignment. Mrs. Peterson said my presentation about Grandpa's repair shop was the most interesting in the class. "That's fantastic, sweetheart." Jack grinned, genuinely proud, but also grateful for the distraction from his own thoughts. "Ice cream to celebrate?" Amy buckled her seatbelt, then gave him a knowing look. "Did the fancy farm job go okay? You seem different." Sometimes Jack forgot how perceptive his daughter could be. "The job went fine, just an old tractor that needed some attention." He started the truck, deliberately focusing on the road ahead. "But?" Amy prompted, clearly sensing there was more to the story. Jack sighed. How much should he tell her? "The farm owner. It turns out I knew her a long time ago, before you were born." Amy sat up straighter. "Her? Was she your girlfriend?" "It's complicated, Amy." Jack navigated them toward their favorite ice cream shop. "Sarah, Miss Williams, and I grew up together. Her family owned the farm back then, before it became what it is now." "Sarah Williams?" Amy's eyes widened, as in Williams' Sustainable Farms. "We just learned about them in science class. They're revolutionizing agricultural technology." She paused, processing this information. "Wait, you dated someone famous?" "She wasn't famous then," Jack said, parking in front of the ice cream shop. "She was just a girl who loved her family's farm and had big dreams about making it better." Amy was quiet as they ordered their usual double chocolate for her, vanilla bean for him. They settled into their regular booth by the window before she spoke again. "Is that why you got quiet whenever we saw the Williams Farms trucks around town?" Jack nearly choked on his ice cream. Sometimes Amy's memory for detail was startling. "You notice that?" "I notice lots of things," she said, with the matter-of-fact tone that reminded him so much of her mother. "Like how you looked at that article about them in the paper last month, then threw it away without reading it. Jack watched his daughter carefully scrape the chocolate chips off her ice cream, collecting them on the side of her bowl. A habit she'd had since she was little. The family history project lay on the table between them, its branches carefully drawn and labeled. There was a conspicuous gap on one side where her mother's information should have been. "Amy," he said slowly, "sometimes grown-ups make choices that seem right at the time, but end up changing everything. Sarah chose to leave town and build her dream. I chose to stay and take over Grandpa's shop. And then you met Mom," Amy added, her voice smaller. "And then I met your mom," Jack agreed. "Life doesn't always go the way you plan, but that doesn't mean it turns out wrong. After all, those choices led me to you." Amy nodded, seeming to accept this. She pushed her collected chocolate chips around with her spoon. "Is Miss Williams nice?" "She is," Jack said carefully. "She kept her dad's old tractor all these years, even though her farm has all kinds of modern equipment now. I'm going to be doing regular maintenance on it. So you'll see her again." Amy's tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp with interest. "Sometimes. For work." Jack emphasized the last word, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince Amy or himself. "Can I come with you sometime?" The question came in a rush. "For the science unit on agricultural innovation. It would be so cool to see the automated systems they use." Jack thought about Sarah standing in that sun-filled barn, asking about his life. About Amy. "Maybe. We'll see." He nodded toward her. "Ice cream. Better finish that before it melts completely." Amy returned to her dessert, but Jack could see the wheels turning in her mind. She had that same look she got when tackling a particularly challenging math problem, determined to understand all the variables. He wondered what Sarah would think of this bright, curious girl who could take apart a carburetor almost as well as she could solve complex equations. The family history project caught his eye again. Amy had drawn the Morrison family tree with careful attention to detail, including dates and locations for 3 generations back. But there was something new added in the margin, a small note about Williams Farms and its impact on local agriculture. She must have added it during class today, not knowing then how personal that connection would turn out to be. The afternoon sun was sinking behind the repair shop when Jack heard the distinctive purr of a luxury vehicle pulling into his gravel driveway. He was elbow-deep in a neighbor's lawnmower engine, while Amy sat at her usual spot on the workbench, alternating between homework and watching him work. The black Tesla was so out of place among the worn pickup trucks and aged sedans that usually frequented Morrison repairs that Amy actually gasped. "Dad, look!" Jack straightened up, wiping, his hands on a shop rag, as Sarah Williams stepped out of the car, looking simultaneously elegant and uncertain in her casual blazer and jeans. She was carrying something that looked like a book. "Miss Williams!" Amy jumped down from her perch, practically vibrating with excitement. "I just learned about your vertical farming system in science class. Is it true that you can grow lettuce in half the time using LED lighting and automated nutrient delivery?" Sarah blinked, clearly taken aback by this enthusiastic greeting. Then a genuine smile spread across her face. "You must be Amy, and yes, it is true, though we're always working to make the system even more efficient." She glanced at Jack. "She has your curiosity about how things work." "Among other things," Jack said, fighting a smile at Amy's barely contained excitement. "What brings you by? The tractor giving you trouble again?" "Actually," Sarah held out what she'd been carrying, a leather-bound yearbook. "I was going through some old things and found this. Thought you might want to see it." She opened to a marked page, and there they were, Sarah and Jack at the county fair, covered in grease and grinning proudly next to an antique tractor they'd restored together. The caption read, "Best in Show, Agricultural Restoration Division." "You guys won prizes?" Amy peered at the photograph. "Dad, you never told me you restored tractors for competitions." "It was a long time ago," Jack said softly, taking in the frozen moment of their shared past. "They looked so young, so full of possibilities. That was the summer before." Sarah trailed off, then rallied. Actually, I had another reason for stopping by. Our new vertical farming facility is hosting an educational open house next week. Given Amy's interest in agricultural science, I thought she might like to attend. She pulled an envelope from her blazer. It's usually just for investors and their families, but I'd love to have both of you there. Amy's eyes went wide. Really? Dad, can we go? Please? Jack hesitated, looking at Sarah. That's very generous, but the timing works out perfectly for my science project, Amy interjected. Mrs. Peterson said we could get extra credit for field research, and this would be perfect. Sarah's eyes sparkled with amusement. She makes a compelling argument. She does that, Jack agreed, recognizing when he was outmaneuvered. All right, we'll be there. Thank you. Perfect. Sarah handed him the envelope, their fingers brushing briefly. The details are all inside, and Jack, feel free to bring your tools. The Heritage Tractor building could use a walkthrough while you're there. After Sarah left, Amy couldn't contain herself. She's so cool, and you guys used to restore tractors together. What else haven't you told me? Jack watched the Tesla disappear down the road, the yearbook still open to their younger selves. It's getting late, kiddo. How about we order pizza and work on that science project of yours? But as he helped Amy gather her homework, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed world was shifting, like an engine with timing slightly off. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if he wanted to fix it or let it run its course. The next 2 weeks fell into an unexpected rhythm. What started as regular maintenance checks on the Heritage Tractor evolved into longer visits, each one peeling back another layer of the years between them. Sarah would find reasons to be in the barn when Jack worked, and he found himself taking more time than strictly necessary with each inspection. "You should see this," Sarah said one afternoon, leading him away from the barn toward a sleek building he hadn't entered before. Inside, a sophisticated drone sat on a workbench, its carbon fiber frame gleaming under the LED lights. "We use it for targeted crop treatment. It can identify individual plants that need attention and deliver precise amounts of water or nutrients." Jack ran his hand along the drone's frame, appreciating the engineering. Amazing how far things have come. Remember when the height of technology was your dad's automated sprinkler system? The one you helped install? Sarah smiled, pulling up a chair. "Dad was so impressed with your work that summer. He used to say you had the touch, could figure out any machine just by listening to it." "Amy's the same way," Jack said, watching. Sarah's face softened at the mention of his daughter. "Last week, she diagnosed a transmission problem just by the sound it made when idling. She's remarkable." Sarah's voice was warm. "The other day, she sent me an email with questions about a hydroponic system for her science project. Her understanding of the principles is well beyond her years." Jack looked up, surprised. "She emailed you?" "Hope that's okay," Sarah said quickly. "She found the company contact information online. I recognized her name and responded personally." Before Jack could reply, his phone buzzed with a text from Amy. "Don't forget we need milk, and please, can we get ice cream?" Sarah peered at the message and laughed. "Ice cream emergency?" "It's becoming a habit," Jack admitted. "Ever since that celebration cone after her family history project." "You still take vanilla bean?" Sarah asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. "Some things never change," says the woman who kept her father's tractor for 15 years. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Sarah cleared her throat and turned back to the drone. "Speaking of the tractor, I've been thinking about expanding our heritage farming program. Show people how traditional methods can work alongside modern technology." "Sounds interesting," Jack said carefully, noting the way she was fiddling with the drone's controller, a sure sign she was nervous about something. "We could use someone with expertise in vintage equipment. Someone who understands both the old ways and the value of innovation." She paused. "The position would come with full benefits, flexible hours." Jack's heart skipped. "Sarah, just think about it," she said quickly. "No pressure, it's just, you're good at this, Jack, always have been. And Amy would have access to all our educational programs, the science labs. The mention of Amy made his chest tight. He thought of the past due notices still hiding in his workshop, the way his daughter's eyes lit up when she talked about Williams Farms technology. "I'll think about it," he found himself saying. Sarah's smile was like sunrise. "That's all I'm asking." She stood, smoothing her slacks. "Now, about that ice cream emergency. There's a new place in town that makes their own waffle cones. Want to compare it to your usual spot?" And somehow, that's how Jack found himself sitting in an artisanal ice cream parlor an hour later, watching Sarah and Amy debate the merits of different chocolate chip distributions while sharing a triple scoop sundae. Amy was explaining her science project, her hands moving animatedly as she described the vertical farming model she was building, while Sarah listened with genuine interest, offering suggestions and encouragement. The scene felt both perfectly natural and absolutely surreal. When Amy excused herself to the restroom, Sarah turned to him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "You've done an amazing job with her, Jack. She's everything good about both of us at that age. Your mechanical intuition, my endless questions." "Both of us?" Jack raised an eyebrow. Sarah blushed slightly. "You know what I mean. She reminds me of how we were before." She trailed off as Amy returned, but her words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibilities and regrets. Later that night, after Amy had gone to bed, Jack found himself looking at the maintenance contract on his desk. Sarah's job offer felt like both an opportunity and a warning, a chance to step into a future he'd never imagined, but also a risk of disrupting the careful balance he'd maintained for so long. He thought of Amy's excited chatter about the ice cream outing, the way she'd started calling Sarah Ms. W, the natural way the three of them had fallen into conversation. Sometimes, he realized, the biggest repairs weren't about fixing what was broken, but about building something new from the pieces of the past. The county fair hadn't changed much in 15 years. The same Ferris wheel creaked against the autumn sky, the same scent of funnel cakes and cotton candy drifted through the air, and the same proud farmers showed off their prized livestock. But this year felt different, because Sarah Williams wasn't just another local girl with a family farm. She was the keynote speaker for the Agricultural Innovation Showcase. "Look what I found in the exhibition hall," Amy came running up to Jack, clutching a faded blue ribbon. "It's from when you and Ms. W won the restoration competition." She held up the ribbon, carefully preserved in its display case among other historical fair memorabilia. "They have a whole section about Williams Farms history." Jack studied the ribbon, remembering the long summer days spent working on that. Old farm, old tractor, Sarah passing him tools and suggesting improvements. They'd been so young, so sure of themselves and each other. "Your father would have loved this," Sarah said, appearing beside them. She'd changed from her presentation. Suit into jeans and a Williams Farms polo shirt, looking more like the girl he remembered. All these people interested in combining traditional farming with new technology. It's everything he dreamed about. "He'd be proud of you," Jack said softly, though maybe a little overwhelmed by the drone demonstration. Sarah laughed. "Did you see old Mr. Peterson's face when we showed the automated harvesting system? I thought his eyebrows might permanently stick to his hairline." "Dad, can we get cotton candy?" Amy interrupted, her attention already drawn to the nearby concession stands. "And maybe ride the Ferris wheel?" "Sure, sweetheart." Jack handed her some money. "Just stay where we can see you, okay?" They watched Amy weave through the crowd, her ponytail bouncing with each step. A group of locals walked past, whispering and glancing their way. Jack could imagine the gossip already spreading through town. Sarah Williams and Jack Morrison, together at the fair again after all these years. "It's strange," Sarah said, her eyes on the prize ribbon. "Sometimes I feel like no time has passed at all, and other times—" She trailed off, watching Amy return with an enormous cloud of pink cotton candy. "Got enough sugar there, kiddo?" Jack teased. "It's for sharing," Amy protested, holding out the fluffy confection. "Ms. W, you have to try it. Dad says the fair." As the best cotton candy in 3 counties, Sarah accepted a piece, and Jack was struck by how natural it felt, the 3 of them sharing cotton candy and fair memories. Amy peppered Sarah with questions about the drone demonstration while they made their way to the Ferris wheel, her enthusiasm drawing genuine smiles from both adults. "Remember when we got stuck at the top?" Sarah asked as they waited in line. "The year before I left for business school." Jack nodded, remembering that suspended moment above the fairgrounds when everything had seemed possible and impossible at the same time. "The operator said it was a mechanical problem, but I'm pretty sure he just forgot about us. You two got stuck on the Ferris wheel." Amy's eyes widened. "What happened?" "Your dad tried to figure out if he could fix it from inside the car," Sarah said, grinning. "Meanwhile, I was planning how to turn the whole experience into a business opportunity, rental cars for stranded Ferris wheel passengers." "Sounds like you guys had fun together," Amy said carefully, with that too perceptive look that always made Jack nervous. "We did," Sarah answered simply. "Sometimes life takes people in different directions, but that doesn't make the good memories any less special." They reached the front of the line, and Amy eagerly climbed into a car. Jack and Sarah exchanged a glance, both remembering that long-ago ride before following her. As the wheel lifted them above the fairgrounds, Jack could see Sarah's modern agricultural complex in the distance, its solar panels glinting in the setting sun. Below them, the traditional fair carried on as it had for generations. "It's like in 2 worlds," Amy observed, following his gaze. "But they don't have to be separate, right? That's what your company's trying to show, isn't it, Miss W?" Sarah looked at Jack, something soft and hopeful in her expression. "That's exactly right, Amy. Sometimes the best future comes from bringing the past and present together." The wheel turned slowly, carrying them through the gathering dusk, and Jack found himself wondering if some things really did come full circle. The call came at 2 a.m., jolting Jack from a fitful sleep. Sarah's voice was tight with worry. "Jack, I'm sorry to wake you, but we've got a serious situation. The main harvester's control system crashed in the middle of the heritage wheat field. We're looking at losing the entire crop if we can't get it moved before the storm hits." Jack was already pulling on his boots. "What about the backup harvester? Undergoing maintenance." "Jack, this wheat, it's the last batch from my father's original seed stock. I can't lose it." 20 minutes later, Jack pulled into the farm complex, rain starting to pepper his windshield. The heritage field was illuminated by portable floodlights, creating islands of harsh brightness in the pre-dawn darkness. Sarah stood with Thomas and several other employees, all looking up at the massive harvester that sat dead in the middle of the field. "The automated system's completely locked up," Thomas explained, handing Jack a tablet displaying a maze of error codes. "Manual override isn't responding either." Jack pulled his emergency repair manual from his truck, a thick binder filled with detailed notes and diagrams he'd compiled over years of working on both old and new equipment. "Give me 10 minutes to look it over." Sarah followed him to the harvester, holding an umbrella over them both as he examined the control panel. Lightning flickered in the distance, followed by a low rumble of thunder. "Storm's getting closer," she murmured. "We've got time." Jack's fingers flew over the diagnostic panel, his mind racing through possible solutions. The problem isn't the automated system. It's trying to compensate for something else. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the mud, and shone his flashlight. Under the massive machine, there, the ground pressure sensors are misaligned. The system thinks it's about to sink into the field, so it's locked down as a safety measure. "Can you bypass it?" Jack shook his head. "Bypassing would risk damaging both the harvester and the field." "But," he pulled out his phone, quickly sketching a diagram in his notes app. "If we can trick the sensors into thinking they're on solid ground, the system should restart normally." For the next hour, Jack worked steadily in the strengthening rain, directing the farm crew in repositioning support plates while he reprogrammed the sensor array. Sarah stayed close, holding the umbrella and passing tools, just like she had during their fair project years ago. Almost there, Jack muttered, making a final adjustment. Try it now. The harvester's systems hummed to life, displays flickering before stabilizing. A cheer went up from the waiting crew as the machine resumed its interrupted work, cutting through the wet wheat with mechanical precision. "You did it!" Sarah threw her arms around Jack, both of them muddy and rain-soaked. For a moment, they stayed like that, the embrace saying everything they couldn't put into words. "Miss Williams," Thomas called from the field edge, "you need to see this." They broke apart and hurried over. Thomas held out a handful of wheat seeds. "The moisture. Readings are perfect. We got to it just in time." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she took the seeds. Dad's legacy. He always said this variety was special, more resilient, better flavor. She looked at Jack. I couldn't bear to lose this connection to him. Jack understood. It was the same reason he'd kept his father's old tools, why he'd taught Amy to repair engines the same way his father had taught him. Some inheritances weren't about money or property, but about carrying forward the things that mattered most. The storm was passing now, dawn breaking over the freshly harvested field. Jack's repair manual lay open on his truck's tailgate, its pages spotted with rain, but the diagrams still clear and precise. He'd been adding to it since his father's death, combining old wisdom with notes on new technology. Looking at it now, he realized it was more than just a manual. It was a bridge between worlds, just like Sarah's heritage wheat field. "You should get some rest," Sarah said softly. "But Jack, thank you, not just for fixing the harvester, but for understanding why it mattered so much." As he drove home in the growing light, Jack thought about legacy, about the things we choose to preserve and the ways we choose to grow. The repair manual on his passenger seat seemed to hold new possibilities, not just for fixing what was broken, but for building something stronger in its place. The workshop was quiet, except for the soft ticking of cooling engines and the whisper of rain against the windows. Jack sat at his workbench, trying to focus on paperwork, but his mind kept drifting back to the morning's events. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. Sarah stood in the doorway, holding a manila envelope and looking as tired as he felt. "I brought coffee," she said, holding up a carrier with 2 cups, "and something else I think we need to talk about." Jack recognized the envelope. It was worn at the edges, the kind colleges used for acceptance letters. His stomach tightened as Sarah placed it on the workbench between them. "Found this while I was going through some old boxes after the harvest crisis," she said, pulling out a faded letter. "My acceptance to Stanford Business School, full scholarship." She paused, running her fingers over the letterhead. "Do you know why I kept it all these years?" Jack took a sip of coffee, buying time. "To remember your achievement? To remember the choice I made? The night I got this letter, I drove straight to your house. You were working late in the shop, just like now." Sarah's voice softened with memory. "I was so excited, had it all planned out. We'd go to California together. You'd open your own repair shop. I'd study business." "Sarah, let me finish, please." She took a deep breath. "But before I could tell you my plan, you showed me the papers your father had just signed, officially making you partner in the business. You were so proud, so sure of your path, and I drove home and cried all night, because I knew we were about to break each other's hearts." Jack stared at his coffee cup, remembering that night differently, remembering how distant Sarah had seemed, how she'd barely reacted to his news. "You never told me about Stanford. And you never told me you'd been offered that job with the agricultural equipment manufacturer in Kansas City." Sarah pulled another paper from the envelope. A job offer letter Jack had forgotten existed. "Your father showed me this months after I left. He thought I should know you'd given up your own dreams to stay." "It wasn't like that," Jack protested. "The business was my dream too. Still is. I know that now. But back then," Sarah spread the old papers on the workbench, "we were both so young, so sure we knew what was best for each other. I thought I was setting you free to follow your real passion. You thought you were letting me go to chase my ambitions. And instead we both ended up exactly where we started," Jack said quietly. Sarah shook her head. No. We ended up where we were meant to be, just not how we imagined getting there. I built my dream right. Here on my family's land, you turned Morrison Repairs into something your father would be proud of. And somehow, she gestured at the papers between them, somehow the road led back here anyway. Jack picked up the Stanford letter, thinking about all the what-ifs it represented. Why tell me this now? Because I don't want to make the same mistake twice, Sarah said simply. Whatever's happening between us now, this second chance we seem to be getting, I want it to be built on truth. No more protecting each other from our choices. The rain had stopped, and through the workshop windows, Jack could see stars beginning to emerge. On the workbench, the old letters lay like a map of roads not taken, choices that had seemed so clear at the time. Amy asked me yesterday if you were going to be around more often, Jack said finally. She's getting attached to you. And you? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. Instead of answering, Jack reached for her hand across the workbench. Their fingers intertwined among the papers of their past, and something shifted in the space between them, like an engine finally finding its rhythm after years of running slightly off beat. The article appeared in the Sunday business section of the state newspaper, Williams Farms, CEO Sarah Williams, From Family Farm to Agricultural Empire. The photo showed Sarah standing in her heritage wheat field, the morning sun catching her hair. But it was the subheading that made Jack's coffee go cold. Tech heiress finds romance with small-town mechanic. They didn't even ask permission to print this, Sarah said, pacing Jack's workshop. She'd arrived early, before Amy was awake, clutching multiple copies of the paper. My PR team is trying to contain it, but it's already online. Jack scanned the article, his frown deepening. The piece was mostly about Williams Farms' innovations, but the reporter had somehow caught wind of their reconnection. There were quotes from townsfolk about their high school romance, speculation about Jack's role in the company's heritage agriculture program, even a mention of Amy. I'm so sorry, Jack. I never meant for your privacy to be invaded like this. Before he could respond, footsteps thundered down the stairs. Amy burst into the workshop, her tablet in hand. Dad, you're trending on social media. Someone at school shared an article about you and Ms. W. Jack and Sarah exchanged alarmed looks. Amy's excitement faded as she read the room. Is something wrong? Come here, sweetheart. Jack pulled out a shop stool. We need to talk about this article. Sarah sat on another stool, unconsciously forming a triangle with them. Amy, sometimes when people run big companies, the media gets very interested in their personal lives, and sometimes they don't tell the whole story, or they tell it in a way that can make things complicated. But isn't it a good thing? Amy looked between them, confused. The article says Williams Farms is revolutionizing farming while preserving traditions. And it talks about how you and Dad are reconnecting, and it's nobody's business. Jack said firmly. They didn't ask us if we wanted this story published. They didn't ask if it was okay to mention you. Oh, Amy's face fell. So, do we have to stop seeing Ms. W? No! Both adults spoke at once, then shared a surprised look. No, Sarah said more softly. But we might need to be more careful for a while. My company's board of directors is very interested in our public image and this kind of personal publicity. She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Jack's phone buzzed. A text from his largest commercial client. Saw the article. Hope this means you won't be too busy for us little guys now that you're dating agricultural royalty. The message's tone made his jaw clench. He'd built his reputation on being reliable, accessible. The guy who'd show up at midnight to fix a broken-down tractor during harvest season. Now people would see him differently, wonder about his motives. My board wants to meet, Sarah said, quietly, watching his expression. They're concerned about the implications of me dating a contractor who works on company equipment. Conflict of interest, they said. I'm not just a contractor, Jack said, more sharply than he intended. This business, what I do, it's not some hobby or stepping stone. I know that, Sarah ran a hand through her hair in frustration, but they're talking about oversight committees, special audit procedures. This isn't how I wanted things to go. Amy had been unusually quiet, looking at the newspaper spread on the workbench. Dad, she said suddenly, isn't this the same thing that happened with Mom when her new job meant we couldn't just be normal anymore? The question hit Jack like a physical blow. He remembered those final months with Amy's mother, the growing pressure of her corporate career, the way their simple life had suddenly seemed insufficient. Looking at Sarah, he saw the same fear in her eyes, history threatening to repeat itself. This is different, Sarah said, but her voice wavered slightly. We're different, aren't we? The morning sun streamed through the workshop windows, catching the framed newspaper article on Sarah's office wall, her first big story about Williams Farm's innovations. It had seemed like such an accomplishment when she'd shown it to him. Now, looking at this new article with its invasive speculation and unwanted attention, Jack wondered if some dreams came with prices they weren't ready to pay. The property deed to Morrison Repairs lay on the conference room table like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. Jack sat in an uncomfortable leather chair, feeling out of place in his cleanest work shirt, while Sarah's board members discussed his family's business as if it were just another asset to be managed. The simplest solution, the silver-haired chairman was saying, would be to acquire Morrison Repairs as a subsidiary. It solves the conflict of interest concerns and gives us an in-house maintenance division for the Heritage Agriculture Program. Sarah sat at the head of the table, her expression carefully neutral. Jack would maintain operational control, of course. With oversight, another board member added, standard corporate governance procedures would apply. Jack's fingers traced the edges of the deed, the same document his father had signed. 30 years ago, taking out a second mortgage to keep the shop going during hard times. Every coffee stain and creased corner held a memory. And if I say no, his voice was quiet but firm. The chairman cleared his throat. Then, unfortunately, we'd have to terminate all maintenance contracts with Morrison Repairs. The appearance of impropriety... That's enough. Sarah's tone cut through the corporate doublespeak. We need to discuss this privately. She stood, effectively ending the meeting. In her office afterward, the tension was thick enough to touch. Sarah stared out her wall of windows at the sprawling farm complex below. They're not wrong about the corporate governance issues, Jack. My position here, the investors I answer to, it complicates things. You mean it complicates us? She turned to face him. There's another option. The expansion project in California. They want me to oversee it personally. 2 years, maybe 3, getting the West Coast operations up to speed. She took a deep breath. You and Amy could come with me. Fresh start, no small-town gossip, no board politics. Jack thought of Amy's science project presentation next week, her excitement about the school robotics club she'd just joined. Thought of his regular customers, the generations of farmers who counted on him. We can't just uproot our lives, Sarah. You, of all people, should understand having roots that matter. Then what do we do? Because right now my board is ready to force the issue, and I can't blame them. The media attention, the speculation about insider dealings. She gestured at the property deed. At least, if you sold to us, you'd still be doing the work you love. Under corporate oversight, with quarterly reports and performance metrics, and everything that made you hate the big ag companies when we were young. Jack stood, picking up the deed. Your father understood why mine wanted to keep the business independent. They respected each other's choices. Sarah's face softened. We're not our fathers, Jack. No, we're not. You've built something amazing here, Sarah. But I've built something too. It's smaller, simpler. But it matters. He stepped closer, touching her cheek. We said we wouldn't make the same mistakes, wouldn't try to change each other's dreams. So what are you saying? I'm saying maybe there's another way, one that doesn't involve either of us giving up what we've built. He pulled out his phone, showing her the email he'd received that morning. Remember Jenny Martinez? She just finished her MBA, moved back to town to help with her family's farm. Equipment dealership. She's looking to invest in local businesses. Sarah's eyes widened as she caught his meaning. A partnership with the Martinez family? They're respected in the community, have the resources to help me expand, but no corporate board to answer to. Jack felt the idea taking shape. I could take on more staff, modernize the shop but keep it independent. And the Martinez dealership already handles maintenance contracts for 3 major ag companies, which would satisfy the board's concerns about conflicts of interest, Sarah finished. A smile tugged at her lips, always the practical problem solver. I learned from the best. Your father used to say, there's always a third option if you look hard enough. Sarah took the property deed from his hands, studying it. A local partnership. Independent but connected. Kind of like us. Exactly like us. Jack smiled. Different road, same direction. Through the office windows, they could see the heritage wheat field where the old John Deere still sat, a bridge between past and future. Sometimes, Jack realized, the hardest repairs weren't about fixing what was broken, but about finding new ways to make things work. Jack stood in front of his bedroom mirror, fumbling with his father's old tie. He'd found it in a box of memories, the dark blue silk still holding its sheen despite the years. Amy sat on his bed, already dressed in a new emerald green dress that Sarah had helped her pick out. You look handsome, Dad, she said, watching him struggle with the knot. Like one of those businessmen in Miss W's office. I look like a mechanic playing dress-up, he muttered, finally getting the tie straight. The charcoal suit he'd bought for the gala felt stiff and foreign. That's not what Miss W thinks. Amy's tone was matter-of-fact. She told me you clean up better than any CEO she knows. Jack's hands stilled on the tie. When did she tell you that? While we were dress shopping. Amy smoothed her skirt. She said lots of nice things about you, actually, about how you see solutions that other people miss. Before Jack could respond, a soft knock at the workshop door downstairs announced Sarah's arrival. Amy bounced up, excitement overtaking her usual preteen composure. She's here. Come on, Dad. Sarah stood in the workshop wearing a midnight blue gown that made Jack's breath catch. She'd kept her makeup subtle, her hair swept up in an elegant twist. But what struck him most was how at ease she looked among the tools and machinery of his world. My 2 favorite people clean up nice, she said, grinning. Her eyes lingered on Jack's tie. Is that Dad's old tie? He confirmed. Seemed right somehow. Sarah touched the silk gently. He wore this to my father's retirement party. They spent the whole evening talking about how farming was changing, arguing about whether computers would ever replace good old-fashioned know-how. Looks like they were both right, Jack said softly. The Williams Farms annual Innovation Gala was held in a converted airplane hangar at the edge of the property. Walking in, Jack felt like he'd stepped into another world. Crystal chandeliers hung from the industrial ceiling, their light reflecting off displays of cutting-edge agricultural technology. Investors in formal wear mingled with farmers in their Sunday best, while demonstrations of new farming techniques played on massive screens. Mr. Morrison! Thomas Chen approached, looking sharp in a tuxedo. The Heritage Program display is getting a lot of attention. Would you mind speaking with some of the investors about the restoration work? Jack glanced at Sarah, who gave him an encouraging nod. Go ahead. Amy can help me greet the board members. For the next hour, Jack found himself explaining the importance of maintaining traditional equipment to a succession of interested investors. To his surprise, they seemed genuinely fascinated by his practical knowledge, asking detailed questions about how older farming methods could complement modern techniques. You're a natural, Sarah said when she finally rescued him, slipping her hand into his. The venture capital group from Chicago is ready to fund an entire heritage equipment training program. Really? Jack raised an eyebrow. What happened to concerns about conflicts of interest? Turns out having a mechanical expert who understands both old and new technology is quite valuable. She led him toward the dance floor, especially one who's partnering with the Martinez family to expand independent repair services across the state. Jack pulled her closer as the music slowed. Speaking of partnerships, Dad! Miss W! Amy's excited voice cut through the moment. She rushed up, clutching her phone. Look what Jenny Martinez just posted. The local news website showed a photo of Jack talking with investors at the Heritage display. The headline read, "Local Legacy Meets Agricultural Innovation. Morrison Repairs Announces Expansion Partnership." They weren't supposed to release that until next week. Sarah frowned. Actually, Jack cleared his throat. I asked Jenny to post it tonight. Figured it was time to write our own story, instead of letting others tell it for us. Sarah's eyes softened as she understood. Here, in front of all her investors and board members, Jack was publicly choosing to be part of her world, on his own terms. "May I have this dance, Ms. Williams?" he asked formally, enjoying the surprise on her face. As they moved across the floor, Jack caught glimpses of their reflection in the hangar's windows, the mechanic and the CEO, his father's tie and her elegant gown, somehow fitting together perfectly in the space between their two worlds. The evening had been going so well that Jack should have known something would break. It happened during the Innovation Awards presentation, just as Sarah was preparing to announce the recipients of Williams Farm's new agricultural education grants. "Ms. Williams," a board member interrupted, approaching the podium with a tablet in hand, "you might want to see this before continuing." Jack watched from his table as Sarah's expression shifted from confusion to concern. She stepped away from the microphone, engaged in intense conversation with several board members. The crowd began to murmur. "Dad," Amy whispered, "what's happening?" Before he could answer, he saw Thomas Chen making his way toward them, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Morrison, I'm sorry, but there's been a situation. One of our competitors is suggesting, well, they're implying that the Martinez partnership was arranged to circumvent corporate oversight. They're threatening an investigation." The watch Sarah had given him years ago, the one he'd kept in his toolbox as a reminder, felt suddenly heavy on his wrist. He'd worn it tonight as a symbol of bridging past and present, but now its presence felt like an accusation. "That's ridiculous," he said, keeping his voice low for Amy's sake. "The partnership was Jenny's idea, and she has all the documentation." "Jack!" Sarah's voice behind him was strained. She'd left the podium to someone else and now stood with her board. "Chairman, we need to talk, now." In a quiet corner of the hangar, away from curious eyes, the situation unfolded. Their competitor had timed the announcement perfectly, releasing concerns about insider dealing, just as Williams Farms was showcasing its commitment to community partnership. "They're saying I orchestrated the whole thing," Sarah said, her calm facade cracking. "That I manipulated the Martinez family into the partnership to maintain control over maintenance contracts while pursuing a personal relationship." "That's not what happened," Amy burst out. She'd followed them despite Jack's attempts to have her wait at the table. "Jenny's mom was at our shop last week talking about expansion before she even knew about Dad and Ms. W." The board chairman cleared his throat. "Nevertheless, the appearance of impropriety—" "Appearance?" Jack's voice was dangerously quiet. He unstrapped the watch, placing it on a nearby table. "You want to talk about appearances? How about the appearance of a company so caught up in corporate politics that it can't recognize genuine innovation when it's right in front of them?" "Jack, please," Sarah started, but he was already continuing. "You know why the Martinez partnership works? Because they understand what Williams Farms used to understand, that real progress comes from respecting both tradition and innovation, not from worrying about how things look to people who've never had grease under their fingernails or dirt under their boots." The chairman's face reddened. "Mr. Morrison, you're hardly qualified to lecture us on corporate governance." "No." "He's right." Sarah's voice cut through the tension. She reached for Jack's watch on the table, but he stopped her. "Don't. Just don't." He stepped back, suddenly exhausted. "You have a company to run, Sarah, a legacy to protect, and I have a daughter who's already been through one parent choosing career over family." He turned to Amy, who stood watching, with tears in her eyes. "Come on, sweetheart, time to go home." "But Dad, now Amy." As they walked away, Jack heard Sarah call his name, but he didn't turn around. The watch lay on the table between them, its broken crystal catching the light of the chandeliers above, another piece of their past that couldn't quite survive the present. In the truck, Amy was unnaturally quiet, clutching her party dress. Around her like armor. "Is this like what happened with Mom?" she finally asked in a small voice. Jack gripped the steering wheel tighter, remembering another fancy party years ago. Another choice between worlds that seemed impossible to bridge. "I don't know, honey. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard decisions. But you and Ms. W love each other. Everyone can see it." "Love isn't always enough, Amy. Sometimes it's about timing and circumstances, and that's stupid." Amy's outburst startled him. "You always tell me that if something's broken, we should try to fix it. You never give up on a repair just because it's hard." Jack looked at his bare wrist where the watch had been, feeling its absence like a physical ache. Some brakes, he thought, ran too deep for simple repairs. The workshop felt emptier than usual the next morning. Jack had spent hours after Amy went to bed just sitting at his workbench, trying to lose himself in routine maintenance tasks, but finding no comfort in the familiar motions. The sound of tires on gravel made him look up, expecting another curious reporter, but instead he saw Sarah's Tesla parking next to his truck. She didn't wait for an invitation, walking straight into the workshop with an air of determination he remembered from their younger days. In her hands, she carried his father's watch. "You left this," she said simply. "Sarah, no, let me finish." She placed the watch on the workbench and pulled up a stool. "I spent all night thinking about what you said, about what Williams Farms used to understand. Do you know what my biggest fear was back when we were young?" Jack remained silent, watching her. "I was afraid of becoming just another corporate farm, losing touch with what made us special. And somewhere along the way, that's exactly what happened. I was so busy proving myself to the board, to the investors, that I forgot what my father taught me. Innovation isn't just about new technology. It's about understanding what's worth preserving." She reached into her bag and pulled out a drawing, clearly done by Amy, showing all three of them standing together in front of a building that combined elements of both Morrison Repairs and Williams Farms. "Your daughter left this on my desk at the gala. She sees what we've both been too scared to admit." Jack picked up the drawing, noting the careful detail Amy had put into it. "What's that?" "That we're stronger together than apart, not just romantically, but in every way that matters." Sarah leaned forward. "I didn't sleep at all last night. Instead, I called an emergency board meeting at dawn." "Sarah, you don't have to." "I told them I was done letting fear of appearances dictate our company's future. The Martinez partnership isn't just good business. It's exactly the kind of innovation we should be pursuing, finding ways to preserve skilled mechanical knowledge while adapting to new technology." Jack studied her face, seeing the familiar determination there, but also something new. A certainty he hadn't seen since they were teenagers dreaming about their futures. "I also told them something else," she continued. "I told them about how I used to spend summers in your father's workshop, learning that sometimes the best way forward is to understand where you've been. About how watching you with Amy showed me that success isn't just about growth and profit margins. It's about building something that matters." "And what did they say?" Sarah smiled. "They reminded me that I own controlling interest in the company. And then they suggested that maybe it's time for Williams Farms to return to its roots, not by going backward, but by bringing the best of the past into the future." She reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "I'm not asking you to change who you are or what you've built. I'm asking if we can build something new together, something that honors both our legacies." "Like what?" Jack's voice was rough with emotion. "Like a training program that combines traditional mechanical skills with modern technology. Like expanding Morrison Repairs through the Martinez partnership while maintaining its independence. Like showing the world that innovation doesn't have to mean losing touch with what matters." Jack looked down at Amy's drawing again, seeing it with new eyes. His daughter had drawn the building with both his old-fashioned sign and Sarah's modern logo, but she'd added something else. A classroom full of young mechanics learning from both of them. "I had it all wrong," Sarah said softly. "I thought I had to choose between my world and yours. But Amy figured it out. They were never really separate worlds at all." The morning sun streamed through the workshop windows, catching the crystal of his father's watch on the workbench. In its face, Jack could see reflections of both past and future, finally aligning into something that made perfect sense. The blueprint spread across Jack's workbench was unlike anything he'd drawn before. Instead of engine schematics or repair diagrams, it showed the proposed expansion of Morrison Repairs, a perfect blend of traditional workshop and modern training facility. Amy sat perched on her usual stool, adding her own notes in the margins, while Sarah discussed the plans with Jenny Martinez. "The hands-on repair bays will stay exactly as they are," Jenny was saying, pointing to the original section of the building. "But we'll add the new training space here with both traditional tools and modern diagnostic equipment." "And the Heritage Equipment Restoration Program?" Sarah asked, though her eyes were on Jack. "Already have 3 vintage tractors lined up for the first class," he answered, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. "Folks are coming out of the woodwork with old equipment they want restored properly." The Martinez partnership had evolved into something none of them had initially imagined. What started as a simple business expansion had grown into a full-fledged educational program, combining Morrison Repair's practical expertise with Williams Farm's technological innovation. "Dad, look!" Amy pointed to a section of the blueprint she'd been working on. "If we move this wall out just a little, we could add a small science lab for testing soil samples and studying crop effects like Ms. W does at the farm." Sarah leaned over to examine Amy's suggestion. "She's got a good eye for design. Must run in the family." "Speaking of family," Jenny interjected with a knowing smile, "have you two figured out how you're going to manage being business partners and whatever else you are?" Jack and Sarah exchanged glances. The past month had been a whirlwind of planning and possibilities, their personal relationship deepening alongside their professional collaboration. The media attention had gradually shifted, from speculation about their romance to interest in their innovative approach to agricultural education. "We're taking it one day at a time," Sarah said, her hand finding Jack's under the workbench. "But I think we've finally figured out that we're better together than apart." "Way better," Amy agreed emphatically. "Ms. W actually knows how to cook, unlike Dad." "Hey!" Jack protested, but he was grinning. The easy way Amy had accepted Sarah into their lives still amazed him. Jenny gathered up some papers, sensing a family moment developing. "I'll have the contractors revise these plans with Amy's suggestions. We should be ready to break ground next month." After she left, the 3 of them stood looking at the blueprint that represented their shared future. Jack remembered another set of plans years ago, when Sarah had first dreamed of modernizing her family's farm. Now they were building something new together, something that honored both their paths. "I talked to the board this morning," Sarah said, tracing the outline of the new building. "They're not just accepting the partnership, they're enthusiastic about it. Turns out a program that bridges the gap between traditional repair skills and modern technology is exactly what the industry needs." "And the conflict of interest concerns?" Sarah smiled. "Funny how those disappeared when they saw the waiting list for our first training session. Sometimes the best way to handle criticism is to prove them wrong." Amy had added more notes to the blueprint, her neat handwriting filling the margins with ideas and questions. Jack watched her work, remembering how she used to do the same thing with his repair manuals when she was younger. Some things, it seemed, were meant to be passed down. "We're really doing this," he said softly, the reality of it finally sinking in. Sarah squeezed his hand. "We really are, though I have one more suggestion for the plans." "Oh?" She pointed to the small apartment above the workshop. It might need some renovation, too. That kitchen is definitely too small for 3 people. Jack's heart skipped a beat as he caught her meaning. Amy's head snapped up, her eyes wide with hope and excitement. The blueprint between them seemed to glow in the afternoon light, no longer just a building plan, but a map to their future. One they would build together, piece by piece, just like every good repair job Jack had ever tackled. The morning of the grand opening dawned clear and crisp, perfect weather for new beginnings. Jack stood in front of the newly expanded Morrison Repairs, watching the sunrise glint off the freshly painted sign, Morrison and Williams Agricultural Services. The familiar red and white of his father's original logo now sat comfortably alongside the modern styling of the Williams Farms brand mark. "Nervous?" Sarah's voice came from behind him as she wrapped her arms around his waist, her chin resting on his shoulder. "A little," he admitted. "You, terrified, but in a good way." She turned him to face her. "Kind of like the first time I tried to change a spark plug in your dad's workshop." The sound of footsteps pounding down the apartment stairs interrupted them. Amy burst out the door, already dressed in the junior instructor uniform they'd designed for the youth program. At 13, she'd insisted on being part of the teaching team for basic maintenance skills. "They're starting to arrive," she announced excitedly. "Mr. Chen just pulled up with the board members, and I saw Jenny's car, too." Indeed, vehicles were beginning to fill the expanded parking lot, everything from luxury cars carrying investors to mud-splattered trucks bringing local farmers. Jack spotted Thomas Chen directing the catering setup, while Jenny Martinez consulted with the local media representatives. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Ready?" The ceremony itself passed in a blur of speeches and handshakes. Jack found himself standing at the podium, looking out at faces both familiar and new. Old customers who'd trusted him with their equipment for years sat alongside corporate executives and agricultural students. In the front row, Amy beamed with pride, while Sarah watched him with loving encouragement. "My father used to say that every good repair starts with understanding," Jack began, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Understanding the machine, understanding the problem, understanding the solution. Today, we're bringing that same philosophy to a new generation. Not just fixing what's broken, but building something stronger for the future." The tour groups moved through the facility, through the traditional repair bays where Jack had learned his trade, through the new educational spaces equipped with both classic tools and cutting-edge technology, through the heritage restoration area where Sarah's father's old tractor now sat as a teaching tool. "Check this out," Amy was telling a group of young visitors, demonstrating how to use both manual diagnostic techniques and modern computer systems. "Sometimes the old ways tell you things the computers miss, and sometimes the computers catch. Things we can't see. The trick is knowing when to use each one." Later, as the crowd mingled during the reception, Jack found Sarah standing in the doorway between the old workshop and the new addition. She was holding something in her hands, a small brass plate that would complete their new sign. "I had this made specially," she said, showing him the engraving, "where tradition meets innovation." "It's perfect," he said, truly meaning it. "Just like us." The sound of Amy's laugh drew their attention. She was showing Jenny's teenage son how to check oil levels, her confidence and knowledge obvious in every movement. In that moment, Jack saw the future they'd built, not just for themselves, but for an entire community. "You know," Sarah said softly, "my father always said the best farms grow more than just crops. They grow knowledge, community, future, generations." She smiled at him. "Turns out the same is true for repair shops." As the sun began to set on their first day as Morrison and Williams Agricultural Services, Jack stood in his father's old workshop. The familiar sense of oil and metal, now mingled with fresh paint and new possibilities. Through the connecting door, he could hear Sarah and Amy planning tomorrow's first official training session, their voices blending together as naturally as the old and new sections of the building. On his wrist, his father's watch kept steady. Time, its restored face marking not just hours and minutes, but the rhythm of a life he'd never imagined possible. Some things he had learned didn't need fixing at all. They just needed the right combination of past and present, of holding on and letting go, of understanding when to preserve tradition and when to embrace change. Outside, the new sign caught the last rays of sunlight, its lettering a promise to the future. Morrison and Williams Agricultural Services, where tradition meets innovation. It was, Jack realized, more than just a business sign. It was the beginning of their next. Chapter 1. They would write together, one repair, one lesson, one day at a time.